Hey there, and welcome. So today, we're going to do something a little different. We are tossing out that old dusty idea of history being just a long list of dates and names you have to memorize. Instead, we're going to look at it for what it really is, a full-on investigation, kind of like a detective story. All right, let's get into it. So let's just start with the biggest question of all. What actually is history? I mean, it seems like a simple question, right? But the answer, well, it's way more exciting and way more important than you might think. To really get a feel for why history matters so much, just try this little thought experiment with me. Imagine, just for a second, that you wake up tomorrow and you have total amnesia. You've no idea who you are, who your family is, you don't remember anything you've ever learned. You'd be totally lost, wouldn't you? Well, that's what history is for us. It's our collective memory. And without it, we as a society are just as lost, with no idea who we are or how to figure out where we're going. Okay, so if history is our collective memory, how does that actually help us, right now? That brings us right into our first section, where we're going to dig into why the past is so unbelievably important for our lives today. So, what do you actually get out of it? Well, for starters, it helps you develop real empathy. It lets you step into the shoes of people from totally different worlds and different times. It also makes you a much sharper critical thinker, teaching you how to look at evidence and figure out what's what. And those are skills you use every single day. And, of course, it's just packed with amazing stories and some seriously important lessons. And that really gets to the heart of what's at stake here. This famous quote from George Santayana, it's not just some old saying, it is a genuine warning. History is kind of like a vast early warning system. It shows us all the paths that led to disaster so that, hopefully, we can be smart enough to choose a different one. All right, so if we want to avoid repeating the past, how do we actually investigate it in the first place? This is where it gets really fun. This is the detective work. We are going to open up the historian's toolkit, and you're going to see it's a method that absolutely anyone can learn. And you know what? It really just boils down to a simple three-step process. First, you have to start with a question that you genuinely care about, something that makes you curious. Then, just like any good detective, you hunt down and you carefully weigh the evidence. And finally, you piece it all together to tell a meaningful story about what happened. All right, so the first and maybe the most important piece of evidence in that toolkit is what we call a primary source. This is the real raw material of history. Think of it like a message sent directly from the past. It could be a letter, a photograph, a diary, anything created by someone who was actually there to see it happen. Now, the other main type of evidence is a secondary source. This is one step removed from the action. It's an analysis or a story that was created after the fact, usually by a historian or some other expert looking back. That textbook you had in school? That's a perfect example of a secondary source. So let's just put these side by side so you can really see the difference. Primary sources. That's your first-hand account, the raw info from the time period. Secondary sources are the second-hand analysis and interpretation, created after the fact. Any good detective needs both, right? You need the raw clues from the crime scene, but you also need the expert analysis to help make sense of it all. But here is the thing, and this is absolutely critical. No piece of evidence is ever perfectly neutral. Every single source, whether it's a private diary or a professional textbook, was made by a human being, and that means it has a point of view, and sometimes a pretty strong bias. A historian's real job is to spot those perspectives and figure out how they might be coloring the story. Okay, let me show you how this plays out with a real-world case study. For a very long time after the Mexican-American War, the story that was taught in U.S. schools was pretty simple. Mexico was the bad guy and they started the fight. For over a century, that was pretty much the accepted version of history. But then, historians started digging back into the evidence. They looked a lot closer at the primary sources, like the orders from U.S. President James K. Polk, who had sent troops right to the border. And you know what? The entire story flipped. The modern understanding is that the U.S. very likely provoked the war because it wanted to take that territory. It's a perfect example of how history isn't just a fact set in stone. It's always evolving. And, this idea is captured perfectly in this quote by the historian Frederick Jackson Turner. As our own world changes, the questions we ask about the past also change. We see things from a new perspective, and so we end up rewriting the history of the past all over again. It's a living, breathing conversation. So all this stuff isn't just for professional historians in some university library. In this last section, we're going to talk about how you can take this detective's toolkit and start using it in the world right around you. So here it is, a simple 5-step guide for starting your very own historical investigation. It all starts by asking a question you care about, maybe something about your own neighborhood or town. From there, you just follow the same steps the pros do. Find your sources, figure out what they mean, connect it to the bigger picture, share what you found, and who knows, maybe even take action based on it. And I promise you, this isn't just a theory. Check out what these real students actually did. A student named Erica looked into a local legend about the Underground Railroad. She actually proved the legend was false, but in the process, she found the real sites and made a fact-checked map for her local libraries. Then there's Barry, who researched his town's transportation history. His work was actually used to help make the case for reopening the town's train station. See, this is history making a difference right now. When you boil it all down, the takeaway here is really simple. History is not a passive sport. It is not just about memorizing stuff out of a book. It is an active process. It's about asking questions, digging for clues, and figuring things out. It's something you do. In the end, what history really is this huge ongoing conversation, an argument even, about who we were, who we are, and who we want to become. The clues are out there, and now the tools are in your hands. So the only real question left is, what are you going to add to the conversation?